Hi, Plant and Animal Science kids. We're going to be talking about the beef industry and some of the terminology you might come across in this unit. This also, just so you know, some of this vocabulary word does count for all cattle, not just beef cattle. It's for dairy cattle as well. So first we have cow, which is a female that has given birth. The opposite of that is heifer, which is a young female that has not given birth. Then we have a bull, who is an intact male or mature male. This bull can reproduce, which means it can have babies, but its counterpart is a steer. Steer has been castrated, primarily used for meat. Then we have a calf, which is the baby name for a baby animal, which is a young cow or calf. If you have plural for calf, it would be calves. Some other words you might come across would be polled, which means they are naturally born without horns, which means they do not have to be dehorned. Then we have horned animals, which are naturally grow the horns, and this does apply to both male and female. It's not just males that produce horns. Marbling is talked about the meat, and this is the desirable fat that is within the muscle, and that makes that nice flavor in beef, especially when you have steaks. We have something called dual purpose breeds. So these are this means that the breed is used for breed is used for meat and for milking. And then calving, which is the process of cows giving birth. So there's different types of cattle operations. We're going to be focusing on 4 of them. So the first one's going to be cow-calf operations. Now, when it says cattle operations, it means it's the type of farm or the type of operation in the cattle industry. Not all farmers raise the calves start to finish. There's kind of a process that the cattle follow. So there's a cow-calf operation. These are farmers that keep mature females and they breed for babies. They breed every year, and the calves are sold 2 different ways, which we'll talk about after. But they are just more so used for breeding and making babies. We have a feeder cattle operation. So this is one of those 2 ways that it could be sold to. So this is kind of that middle ground. It's not quite ready for slaughtering. It's not at market weight. It needs to gain some weight. So they're what's called a yearling. And so these are just weaned animals, and so just under a year. And so they're sold until it's time to go to something called a feedlot. So they're kind of this in this in-between stage, and so farmers will buy these babies and then raise them up before they go to what's called a feedlot. So that's one type of operation. The next is a feedlot. So this is a feedlot is it's kind of a confined close spaces. You might see if you've gone on a road trip up north in Central Valley, driving up the 5, there's all of a sudden there's going to be a bunch of cattle in these pennings, and what it is that they're feeding these cattle to get them ready for market. And so they're kind of finishing them up on a diet to get them nice and plump and fat, ready for slaughtering. Now, producers, what they do is this is primarily for beef. It's not for breeding. So the feedlot buys feeder calves or yearlings, and they feed the animals up till it's the proper weight, and then they will be sold for to get processed for meat. Then they also could then there's the last type of operation, which is not exactly for the market, but it's for purebred breeders. Now, these are for replacement animals for breeding, usually for cow-calf operations. You kind of replenish the genetics in those herds. So then we have the purebred breeders. So here's just kind of a visual way to to see this. So we have cow calf, so it means moms and babies are breeding for babies. Then we have feeder cattle operation, where they have a bunch of yearlings or youngsters, and they're kind of this in-between stage before they're not quite ready for processing yet. They need to grow a little bit bigger. Then they have the feedlot, which they're fed in these very large pens till they get into market weight. And then we have purebred breeders, which are primarily bulls and females breeding purebred, as in they're not really crossbreeding with other breeds. They're sticking, Angus with Angus and, Shorthorns with Shorthorns. So they're worrying more about the genetics of and the potential for a good market animal, not so on making an animal for beef. So, some of the parts of an animal you might recognize that we've talked about for other units. We're not really going to focus too much on this unit, but again, the muzzle, crop, loin, tail, hock, those are all things that we have talked about in other units. Beef meat cuts, so again, something that we've talked about, meat cuts, and so this would be the meat cuts for beef. If you have, carne asada is your favorite, where does that carne asada come from? Well, it's actually in this area here. Those of you that have heard of like round roast or rump roast, that's where this is coming from. If you've eaten the ribs, it's coming from here. If you had filet mignon, which is the most expensive cut of meat, it is going to be right up here. So kind of interesting image of the different cuts of meat for cattle. So just kind of a review that cattle are ruminants, and if you remember, a ruminant is a hoofed animal that has the 4 chambered stomachs. It's the rumen, reticulum, omasum, abomasum. This is a review, but just kind of wanted to tell you, remember, cattle fall into that category. So, ladies and gentlemen, use this as a reference. Your next activity is going into vocabulary. You can use this to help you with your vocabulary activity. Let me know if you have any questions. Have fun.